Hi, this is Karen Gedney. I'm a physician of a prison system for almost 30 years, and this is Prison Bytes. Short, unexpected little stories from behind the walls of a prison. The reason I'm doing this once a week is because I hope you're entertained a bit, and two, I truly hope that maybe it will bring up some questions for you about what we're doing with prisons in the United States and does it really make sense. Today's story is a little bit different. There are many issues in a prison. You can imagine that as a physician, I have a totally different perspective than custody. I'm oriented to heal, reduce harm, help, be compassionate. On the custody side, they are very much interested in issues like security, safety, making sure nothing happens, making sure the inmates do not escape. I want to share an unexpected story about a particular custody officer that I'm going to call Harold. When I started over about 30 years ago, I met this officer and he was exceptionally unique. He has stood out in my mind for the last 3 decades, even though he is no longer with us. He was one of the first African-American Navy SEALs in the United States. He had a very different perspective coming into the prison as an officer. He had been in the military 30-odd years as a Navy SEAL. But what made him incredibly unique and a tremendous asset for the inmates is he understood them. And when I say he understood them, he really understood them. He grew up as basically a juvenile delinquent from the age of 7 to about 17. At 17, he gets before a judge, and a judge had an option. He could have done a variety of things, but in those days, that was back in the 50s, he told Harold, you got 2 choices. In 2 weeks, you're going to be 18. The amount of processing it takes in the courts, I could sentence you to years in prison as an adult because you have a very bad track record. Or, I know someone in the Navy. If you join, because he saw probably some potential in this individual, he said, if you join, you keep straight for 4 years, you leave the Navy with a record that's clean, we'll expunge your entire juvenile record. Not only did Harold do that, he actually also went from UDT, which is underwater demolition teams, to ultimately Navy SEALs. He never went back to the wrong side of the fence. He became an exemplar of what is possible if someone at the right time, in the right place in life, gives an individual a chance and the ability to make a decision. He could have made a decision, no way am I going into the military, you can't make me, and he could have spent a life in prison being bitter. Let me tell you what Harold did and what I saw happen when I interacted with him all those years ago. I was absolutely new in the prison, didn't know anything about prisons, and I was taking care of a medium security prison yard. Next to us, we had a minimum security prison where Harold was an officer. After 30 years in the military, when he retired, he decided, hey, I'm getting a little bit bored, what should I do? And he went and worked as an officer. And there he had an interesting confluence of, let's say, serendipitous positive events. The lieutenant that he worked for had also been a veteran. In fact, both of these men had been combat veterans in Vietnam. And the prison director at that time had also been a combat veteran in Vietnam. And Harold was given permission to really start one of the first Vietnam veterans clubs in the institution. And that Vietnam Veterans Club was, let's say, the prototype of other VVA chapters that occurred in the 2 prison systems next to that camp. Harold had a unique ability to understand that men needed, 1, responsibility. They needed to do something valuable. They needed to give back. And they needed to be held accountable. One of the things that he started, which I always thought was unique, he had bicycles that were in a state of disarray volunteered to the prison, and the inmates in the VVA chapter ended up repairing the bicycles and giving them ultimately to children in need. Now, the inmates loved this. They were able to use their skills. They were able to have ownership. They held each other responsible, not for messing up this opportunity. They were giving something back, and they were giving something to disadvantaged children, which many of them actually had been in their own childhoods. Another thing that he did, he started the GED program on that camp. And it is extremely important that an individual, if they're exposed to education, then their horizons broaden and they think entirely differently. He started Spanish as a second language. He also had inmates that would go out in the community and, let's say, fix the monuments and the areas around the parks, and he was incredibly respected. It was a tremendous loss when he ultimately died. But he ended up inspiring other Vietnam vets. I'll bring in particular a particular inmate at the maximum security next to that camp. I'm going to call this individual Brian. Brian was a Vietnam vet. He came in at a very young age, was incredibly bitter. And at first he was, let's say, a major disruptor on that yard. But after a while, he matured, and he said that one day he woke up and he realized, I'm going to be here for literally forever. I've got a choice. I can make this place more habitable to live in, or I can make it miserable. And about at the same time, he was hearing what the minimum security camp was doing. He ultimately wrote a grant. It was known the BETA grant, Bureau of Alcohol and Drug Abuse grant, to help veterans who had substance abuse problems. And that grant went on for about 3 years. It was seed money for the state. And the state was expected to then develop programs after that. That did not happen as well as we would thought, but that is where I came into the picture, where the Vietnam veterans at the minimum security camp said, hey, Dr. Gedney, we hear that they're doing this over at the maximum prison, having a substance abuse class. Can you really start one for us? I did not really know anything about substance abuse, but I ultimately took that on as a challenge. And I'd like to wrap this little segment up to let you know that it only takes one individual to make profound differences in cultures. And that person tends to be a leader. That person tends to inspire. And more than anything, they teach what's possible through responsibility, integrity, and hope. And I think back that that would have never happened if a judge had not had the option to steer a juvenile delinquent from one direction to an entirely different direction, to go from many years in prison to being one of the first African American Navy SEALs in the United States. And with that, I'd like to say, I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to telling you another unique story from the inside of prison walls in a week. Thank you very much.